Well, a very good day to you. My name is Pearl Kupe, and I am speaking to you from Pretoria, which is the capital of South Africa. It gives me very, very great pleasure to be a part of this absolutely wonderful, excellent leadership summit, which has been arranged and organized by Nelson Amadigwe and his team from Nigeria, the Next or Generation Next Leadership Summit. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to express a few thoughts around the theme that we're looking at, which has to do with influence. It's an exciting thing to be talking about influence, and I'm also very privileged to be joining other speakers on this platform, including Jan Edwards, who is a good friend of mine who I met in Geneva a few years ago. And in Geneva, we were attending a leadership summit, a GILPP summit, which had to do with leadership and public policy. I think influence is an importantly critical subject that we have to look at in this era. And since our hosts deal specifically with leadership, I think it would be absolutely appropriate to discuss leaders and the capacity that they carry to be influential. A leader is naturally somebody who is influential. Nobody can claim to be a leader if they're not influential. I think somebody once said that if you claim to be a leader and nobody's following, then you are actually in denial. And I don't want to talk just about leadership today, but I want to talk of a certain type of leadership. There are many, many leaders around the world, and we see different styles of leadership around the world. We are seeing areas of leadership where some of the nations are desperately praying for some of those leaders to leave. So clearly there are examples of leaders who are not the best leaders for their nations. I come from Southern Africa, and within the last 3 months, we have actually seen a huge shift in leaders where we've seen 2 presidents within the Southern African region actually resign. And so leadership is a critical issue, and influential leadership is a type of leadership that is transformational. So my first point would be to say that if we are talking about influence and we are also talking about leaders, then we cannot help but talk about transformational leaders. The kind of leader that is needed in this environment, in this season, in this time, and in every region, regardless of what continent you come from, whether you come from Africa, whether you come from Europe, whether you come from Asia, whether you come from America, every continent needs a transformational leader. And I'm saying this because sometimes we think that there is a lack of leadership only in one region. I've seen people talk about Africa as if we don't have any leaders or any good leaders. We do have some transformational leaders that we have seen, and other regions also have leaders who really need to evolve to become transformational leaders. So there's no one region that can say we have it made and we have the model on or not just the model, but we are exhibiting the full aspects or all the criteria that is connected to or related to transformational leadership. And in talking about transformational leadership today, to make it practical and to make it relevant, I actually want to do a case study. And I'm going to do a case study on somebody I consider to have been a transformational leader. The country I have elected to talk about is a country in Africa, because quite often Africa is given very negative stereotypes, and often we paint Africa as if there's nothing good that comes from it. As an African, I think it's my responsibility and my duty to brand Africa, the true Africa as it exists. And I have seen some absolutely amazing leaders come out of Africa who have ruled and have exhibited transformational servant leadership style. And so I have elected and selected to talk about Botswana. I'm going to use Botswana as my case study, and I'm going to use the first president, interestingly enough, of Botswana. His name is Sir Seretse Khama of Botswana. I'm going to use him and how he transformed a nation which was initially known as one of the 25 poorest nations in the world. He not only transformed that nation to become one of the wealthiest nations in Africa, but he transformed the nation in terms of its values, its character, and what it stood for. So, as I've said, transformational leaders are the ones who will be influential leaders. Also, as somebody who resides, a permanent resident in South Africa, we've seen another transformational leader in the example of Nelson Mandela. The world knows him as Nelson Mandela. We in South Africa know him as Utata Madiba, who was himself a transformational leader. So I am going to just start off by, sharing, I think, one or two few principles around what I feel are aspects or characteristics of transformational leaders. Incidentally, there is a movie that recently came out called United Kingdom. It tells the story of the president I'm about to use as a case study now. United Kingdom, a movie of Seretse Khama and his journey in United Kingdom and the journey of Botswana going and reaching independence. Now, Botswana became independent in 1966, along with many, many African countries. Many of them became independent in the 60s, and they were becoming independent from having been colonized. So a lot of Africa, many of the 54 African nations, were either colonized or made into protectorates. Botswana was one of the nations that became a British protectorate. And in 1966, Botswana became independent. And interestingly enough, as I've said, in 1966, Botswana was on the list of the 25 poorest nations in the world. There was no infrastructure. There was hardly anything except for a rail line. There was a railway that went through. So Botswana was really used as a transit country, a nation that you just go through. You take the train and you go through, and you barely even stop. You stop maybe to fuel and you go through, because there were no roads. There were hardly any roads. There was hardly any infrastructure, no buildings, nothing. So Botswana, in its independence year, did not inherit any buildings, any infrastructure, any so-called development. It was on the list of 25 poorest nations. And this is what the first president of Botswana, Seretse Khama, inherited. A nation that was on the list of 25 poorest nations, not in the country, not in the region, not in the continent, but in the world. And of course, Botswana, later on, there was the discovery of diamonds. But I really want to use the first president to illustrate some of the characteristics I think we need to see if we're looking at leaders who will be influential leaders, leaders who will leave a legacy, leaders who will leave a footprint, leaders who will actually be leaders who can be said to have done something for their community and for their nation, who will leave a real sense of influence. Then we're looking at the transformational leader. In one of our local languages, the language of Setswana, we have a proverb which says, "Kgosi ke kgosi ka batho." And the proverb essentially means that a chief or a leader is only a leader. A chief is only a chief because of the people. So the only reason, the compelling reason for you to be a chief, the compelling reason for you to be in leadership is not so that you can be, hero worshipped, but a leader is a leader because of the people. In other words, you are a leader so that you can exhibit responsible leadership. If there were no people there, you would not be a leader. So there are obligations that are attached to leadership. There are responsibilities that are attached to leadership. Leadership is not about surrounding ourselves with a number of bodyguards and moving in all these entourages so that we can be seen how powerful we are. But leadership is around taking responsibility, taking ownership, and it's around stewardship. So you are a leader because of the people, and it is a thing of responsibility. So I want to first say that if we're talking about leadership, and if we're talking about influential leadership, we are talking about people who understand their accountability, and that their accountability is not to their pocket. Their accountability is not to their stomachs, just feeding themselves and eating, or as they say in Nigeria, around their bellies, increasing their bellies. Their accountability is not to enriching themselves, which is what we are seeing, in many countries where leaders are just, raiding and looting the nation's banks and the nation's coffers. So leadership is not about accountability to feeding oneself, but it's about an accountability to a people. So again, I say, khosi ke khosi ka batho. A chief or a leader is only a leader for and because of the people. A transformational leader, therefore, and an influential leader is one who has the people of the nation at heart, wanting to know, are they eating, wanting to know if they have good health, if they have access to health, if they have access to education, if they have access to food, if they have access to shelter. That is an influential leader, somebody who's concerned about the people's needs, making sure that they're eating, and it's not just the leaders and the top leaders who themselves are eating, but everybody at every level is eating, looking at the whole community, taking care of the needs of the youth, taking care of the needs of the women, taking care of the needs of the vulnerable, of the sick, the HIV/AIDS impacted and affected, taking care of the disabled. So it's not just looking at a certain category of people, but it's looking at the whole community and making sure that the community is being fed, the community is being taken care of, the community has access to the basic needs, food, shelter, all the things that are important, not only for our life sustenance, but also for dignity's sake. So that's the one aspect, is khosi ke khosi kabatu. A chief is a chief because of the people, understanding the needs of the people. And a transformational or an influential leader is also, I think, somebody who has humility and who is accessible to the people. In this era, we see a lot of leaders who are just inaccessible, and they're disconnected and they're out of touch. All they do is just move around in their cliques. They don't go out to the rural areas. They're out of touch in terms of what are the needs in the villages. They're out of touch in terms of what are the needs in the rural areas. And in most communities, especially our African communities, you will find that the majority of the population actually do not reside in the cities, but the majority of the population actually live in the so-called, what is termed the so-called rural areas. So for me, a transformational leader would be important for that leader not only to sit in their high and mighty offices in the city, but somebody who's able to go out regularly to the communities, to hear the communities, to hear what their needs are, and to make sure that those needs are met. So a transformational servant leader, one who serves, one who has humility, and one who is accessible and is not just, moving around with the rich and famous and just seen in the high and mighty places. So those are a couple of characteristics that I think identify a transformational leader who will be an influential leader. And as I've said, I'm basing this on a case study of Botswana. And this is something that I had seen in the first president of Botswana, Seretse Khama himself, who was somebody I was privileged not only to have seen from afar, but somebody who I knew from a close-up range, As somebody who worked closely with my mother in particular, and a president I'd observed at a close range, somebody who loved people, somebody who was always in touch with his people, always traveling, going out to the communities, somebody who had carried a great burden for his people. Yes, I think again, a transformational leader, once again, is a leader who is somebody who has great character. We sometimes look at just technical skills. Many times we look at the skills or the qualifications of a leader. And I think that if we're looking at leaders of influence, this is a time that we must not only look at the doctorate degree or what level of education that they have, but also looking at character. Character is a critically important issue. We need to have leaders who are upstanding morally, leaders who are not looting and raiding our coffers, as I've said, but leaders who can be role models, especially to our young people. I think there is a shortage of leaders who young people can look up to, who are family oriented, who are taking care of their families, and who are role models, who the youth can actually say, I want to role model and emulate myself after this leader. So it's important as we have leaders of influence to have leaders who can be role modeled, who are values based, leaders who have Ubuntu, what we call Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is a Zulu word, which simply means, it means a number of things. What Ubuntu means is that I respect and honor other people. Ubuntu means I honor other people. I don't just look out for myself. Ubuntu means that I am because of you. And so together, we need to prosper together. There's no point in just one person prospering. So we need leaders who have and carry the aspect of Ubuntu. To properly illustrate the meaning of Ubuntu, there's a story that was told of a European who went out to one of the African rural areas, and he challenged the children who were playing there to say that he wanted them to compete and to race. And he said to them, the first person who can go to that tree over there and race and run and gets there the fastest, I'm going to give them this bag of candy, this bag of sweets. And so the children went to the starting mark of the race, and he went through the whole procedure. On your marks, get set, ready, steady, go. And much to his surprise, he found that before the children would run, they all held hands, connected their hands, held hands, and they all took off together when he said go. And they all arrived at the finish line at the same time. And he expressed such amazement and surprise. And he said, why did you do that? And the children explained to him that it's not a real win unless we all win. So in other words, Ubuntu means that when I eat and you eat and we all eat, then that is an expression of Ubuntu. And I'm saying that influential leaders and transformational leaders are not those who will just want to prosper by themselves, who will not just want to gather and amass wealth by themselves. But the influential leader is the one who will hold hands with everybody, regardless of their race. So your race is not a reason for me to hold hands. I will hold hands for you regardless of what color, hold hands with you regardless of what color you are. I will hold hands with you regardless of what gender you are, whether you're male or female. I will hold hands regardless of what tribe you are. So the aspect of tribalism should not be something that actually impacts our style of leadership, Africa, or wherever you are. So I should not be a leader who comes in and then puts all the members of my tribe to be part of my cabinet. So I should be able to hold hands. Ubuntu means I hold hands with you, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your gender, regardless of your color, regardless of your class or status in society, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're educated or not educated. Ubuntu means I'm going to hold hands with you, because when we all prosper, when we all eat, when we all have access to education, when we all have electricity, when we're all together bridging the digital divide and the gap, and we all make it, when we are all sleeping on a full stomach, then it means that we are all winning. It's not about just one person winning or one category of people winning. So an influential leader, I would say, is that leader who understands that and has the capacity to carry others along with them. So we've said a leader of influence is that leader who is transformational. It's a leader who has come to serve and not just wanting to be served. It's a leader who is humble. Influential leader is a leader who's accessible to all people, not just the rich and the famous. A influential leader or transformational leader is a servant leader who has character and who is Ubuntu values based. In other words, concerned about the community as a whole and not just with one individual or a category or group of people. I think I would also say that a transformational or influential leader for me, and who Sareta Kama also was a great example of, is a leader who knows the issues. Like I've said, they're in touch with the community. They're not sitting up there in their high tower, in their office, and just, liaising with all the powers that be. But they're really concerned about bringing and making a difference to everybody in the community. You can't say that you've been influential if you're only touching the upper echelons of society. We have to touch every level and every group of people, every tribe, every ethnicity, every person out there, the disabled and the vulnerable in particular. We need to look out for those even more, and pay attention to them even more. Another point I'd like to make around influential leaders and what I call transformational servant leaders is that these are also leaders who know how to mobilize citizens to take responsibility for their community. I don't believe that we have to leave everything to our leaders. If you examine and look at the original word, actually, for a politician, and you go and do an etymology and a study for the word politician, you will actually find out that a politician is related to a civil servant. The original meaning of the word is connected to the word civil servant. And civil servant really just means a good citizen. So each and every one of us are required to be good citizens. We have an accountability to actually be a part of the community, to empower our communities, to make sure that our communities are doing well. So I feel that an influential leader, a transformational leader, is one who's not going to be trying to perform the leadership job by themselves, but they know how to get out into the communities and mobilize the communities to do better. To say, how can we get involved in making sure that our villages have access to water and to clean water? How can we get involved in this environmental project and making sure that our communities are cleaned up? So it's not just the responsibility of the government, but we as a community have a role to play and a part to play in cleaning up our environment and making sure that the environment is clean and that our people are healthy. We're not impacted by diseases because our environment is clean and we've played a role in it. An influential leader for me is one who has this know-how and capacity to mobilize the community and say, let's build this nation together. Let's hold hands in true Ubuntu style and Ubuntu fashion, and let's build this nation together, a nation that we can be proud of. Again, I'm reminded by the first president of Botswana. And when Botswana was, before she had been able to get money through her diamonds and was still considered a poor nation, in the early 70s, Botswana had to build the university. And I remember with clarity as a young lady, a young girl, the president issuing a challenge to the community. And this is what he said to the Botswana nationals. And he said to them, he said, listen, we have to build a university, but the government does not currently have the funds to build the university. And he said to them, the second thing he said is that this university is not just for the government. This university is for the people of Botswana. This university is for your children, so that your children, my children and your children, can be educated and be meaningful and relevant people, not only in our community, but as global citizens of the world. And he said the government doesn't have money to build this university. But he says, I want to challenge every family and I want to challenge every community. He said, the nation of Botswana are farmers. Much of the money that they make is from exported beef. And he said, we may not have money, but every home has cattle. Every individual owns at least one cow. And he challenged the nation and the nationals of Botswana to bring each of them to bring one cow as a seed, I would say, to plant a seed towards the university. And the project was called One Man, One Beast. One man, one beast. He said, you bring a cow representing your family and your home. We will sell that cow and we will build our university. And so the foundations of the University of Botswana were built by a president who was able to mobilize the community to be part of building the nation. And of course, later when Botswana got diamonds and they got a lot of money, they were able to invest in more infrastructure for the nation. So a transformational leader for me is a leader who is able to mobilize the community. I would like to end this because I was told this is supposed to be a 30-minute discussion. I'm left with 2 or 3 minutes just to speak. But I would like to end my little presentation, and I hope you've gotten a few nuggets from it. But I would like to end my little presentation with these thoughts. Is to say, in this global environment, I strongly believe that there is a lot of room for influential leaders coming from Africa. There is a lot that we carry in terms of character, in terms of African values that I think we can share with the world. Our principles of Ubuntu, our principles of character, and some of our values have a very rich legacy and carry very deep history. And I think there's a lot that we as Africans can teach and carry out in the global platforms. I have the privilege myself of teaching on leadership in some of these global platforms. At the Geneva Institute of Leadership and Public Policy, I'm a facilitator there, privileged to be a facilitator there. In the Crans-Montana World Leaders Forum, I'm privileged to be a part of that, and also sit on the Honorary Executive Committee for Africa Women Leaders Forum. And so there are many places globally where I think that as Africans, there's a lot that we can contribute, and so don't shut us out. And also as women. So I'd like to leave that thought with you there as myself an African woman, to say that there are African leaders who are influential out there who have done amazing things for their nations, like Seretse Khama. I can think of many other leaders, Julius Nyerere and many others. And Kwame Nkrumah, many others who have done fabulous things. And there's a potential for women. The statistics for women leaders out there are appalling. And I think this is an environment which should be open to influential leaders. So to all the industries out there, the companies out there, the legislatures, the nations out there, I want to challenge you to open up your platforms to transformational, responsible leaders who also are of African origin and are of the female gender. I want to thank you so much for taking time to listen to just my few thoughts. They were just a few thoughts that I had in my heart, and I hope they've been very influential and, well, very impactful, or left you with some thoughts. I hope they've provoked some thoughts in you. And you are an influential leader. You carry influence. And so let's go out there and be influential leaders who are humble, who are accessible, who want to serve, not just be served, but serve, who have character, who are values-based, who have Ubuntu, who know how to mobilize others into leadership. And let's take a hold of our nations and build this nation. Once again, I want to send out big congratulations to you, Nelson, and especially to the youth. You're doing amazing work. I'm so proud of you as a generation of young people who are looking to take responsibility for leadership in your nation and globally. So well done. And we are here as people who are a little bit older. I won't confess to my age, but a little bit older, to work alongside with our youth. Well done once again, and thank you for the opportunity.